Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and what the price action is telling us as far as whether we could get that retest of 42,000 or we're going to see the push higher from current levels. So before we get started, guys, I do want to give you an update. The reason I was out last week, in case you missed my updates on Twitter, is I did have COVID. So I'm still about 80%. I'm not quite 100% yet, but good enough to start doing these videos. But I just wanted to say thank you guys for your patience and all the well wishes. I really do appreciate it. All right, so looking at Bitcoin, obviously over the holidays, we've had a lot of sideways movement. So not a lot to talk about here in terms of the recent price action. But one thing I do want to revisit is something we talked about a couple weeks ago. So we have talked about how when Bitcoin puts in a liquidation candle like December 4th, at least over the last 12 months, it does have a habit of not only retesting that low, but actually moving just below it before moving higher again. So what am I talking about here? If we look back here toward January of last year, so we had this liquidation low here and this one, and then of course the May sell-off, and also this one here. So we've had 5 liquidation events apart from the December 4th candle. And every single time when Bitcoin does this, it tends to move below that liquidation low before moving higher again. So it not only retests that low, but actually dips just below it before we get the next push higher. It's happened every single time, at least in 2021. So the question now is, I mean, obviously this liquidation candle happened in 2021, but the question now is, do we get that move down here below this area between, maybe 40 and 42,000 before we get that next push higher? I personally think that just looking at this price action here over the last 12 months, that it does seem likely that we see Bitcoin move down here, get one final capitulation into this area before we put a bottom in and move higher, potentially back toward 53,000. So that's kind of my plan. My plan hasn't changed. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned I did have buy orders all the way down here from the high 30s all the way up toward just above 42, and nothing there has changed. I still have buy orders down here just in case we do get that final capitulation into this area, just like we've seen every other time. So the question now is, is this time going to be different from the other times we've seen Bitcoin put in this liquidation low? And again, my opinion is that it's not going to be different. We're probably going to see Bitcoin really retest those lows before we get that next push higher. The only thing, in my opinion, that would negate this, so the only way that, and again, this is my opinion, but the only way Bitcoin avoids a retest of 40 to 42 is if it can get it back above 53,000. If it can get back above 53,000 on a daily closing basis, then I do think we get that push up into 60 and potentially a move back toward all-time highs. So my plan is very simple right now. I'm looking toward 40 to 42. I want to buy down there. I do have buy orders set. Alternatively, if we get a close above 53, I'm also a buyer there. And I think that a move above 53 would likely mean that we're not going to get the retest down here. So if we do see Bitcoin move above 53, it kind of cancels out the idea that we get a move down here toward 42. Alternatively, as long as we're below 53 though, guys, I personally want to buy lower down toward $40,000 to $42,000. So lastly, let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. And that is, I know a lot of people have seen this, but there is a potential head and shoulders pattern that I know a lot of people are looking at. I've seen it brought up before on Twitter. And they're looking at something like this, where potentially the right shoulder is already formed. So whether this is the right shoulder back here, or we get a move up here just above it toward 53, and then that becomes the right shoulder, regardless, what they're saying is if we see Bitcoin move below 43, which is where the neckline is, that would confirm the pattern and send Bitcoin lower toward, back toward $30,000, potentially lower. Very similar to what we saw back here. So this was also a head and shoulders pattern. Now you could argue that this was more of a rounded top back here, but it does still qualify as a head and shoulders, where we had 2 left shoulders back here. We had the head and the right shoulder. We saw Bitcoin break down through here, and then obviously we saw that retest to 29,000. So the question now that a lot of people are asking is it going to play out the same way that it did back here? Personally, I don't think that it is, because, oftentimes markets do rhyme, But the idea that Bitcoin is just going to repeat like it did back here in May and just sell off toward $30,000 or lower, once again, exactly like it did back here, I just don't see that happening. I think that a much likelier scenario, and this would fit Bitcoin's MO of faking people out, would be to get a move below 43, a retest of this area down here around 40,000. Once again, just like every other time Bitcoin has put in these liquidation candles. Okay, so we get a move down here toward 40,000, and then this becomes a bear trap. We get a reclaim of this trend line, and then we see Bitcoin move higher in 2022. I think that that is a much more likely scenario just because this would trap a lot of sellers. It would be that last capitulation before we get the move higher. So I think that that's a lot more likely if we do see a move down here toward 40. But again, the idea that we're just going to get a very similar, scenario that we got back here, where Bitcoin just sells off from these levels, we get a head and shoulders that plays out again exactly the same, and a move back toward 30,000. I mean, look, it could happen. I just don't think that it's the likely scenario. So once again, though, I mean, regardless of whether we see Bitcoin move higher right now back toward 53 or move toward 40, the idea that it has to get back above 53,000 is the same. It still has to get back above that mark to move back toward 60,000 plus. And until that time, expect sideways movement and, potentially a move down here toward 40,000 first. So that's what I'm watching. Very, very simple. As long as it's below 53, I want to buy between 40 and 42, get back above 53 on a daily closing basis. I think that negates the idea of a retest of 40 to 42, and we likely get that push up into $60,000. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed the content, please be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to get notified when I release videos just like this one, be sure to subscribe and also hit that bell icon. And don't forget to leave your comment below. So I hope that this video has helped you guys. I'll talk to you soon.